welcome back to my channel. I'm Leandra the TBR0, and today we're going to go through my Our Fantasy 2025 bingo board TBR, and I am hoping to do hard mode. Have I ever done this before? Nope. Am I flying too close to the sun? Yes, and I'm very excited about it. So without further ado, let's check out which fantasy, sci-fi, and horror books I'm hoping to read in the next year. Welcome to a different part of my apartment where I'm sitting in front of my computer. On one side, I have the 2025 bingo card filled out with all of my books, and on the other side, I have the prompts, and we're going to be going row by row as designed by Our Fantasy themselves. And so the first prompt is in the upper left-hand corner, and it says Knights and Paladins. One of the protagonists has to be a paladin or knight. If you want hard mode, then the character has to also have an oath or a promise to keep. The book I'm choosing for this one is Swordheart by T. Kingfisher. I have a backup option in case it doesn't count, because no one was calling him a knight. They just kept calling him a swordsman. In some reviews, they called him a knight, and I was like, what's the difference? I do not know. I am not educated in these descriptions. And so I'm hoping that this will count. And in one of the reviews, it said that he makes an oath or a promise to his love interest that he will protect her at all costs. And I'm reading this book actually in April, hopefully with some friends. We have a buddy read planned, so it's kind of perfect. And I think it'll start me off on the right track. But if it doesn't count, I do have a backup by T. Kingfisher as well, which is the sequel to Paladin's Grace. I can't remember the title off the top of my head, but it's in the same world. And I know in that series, at least one of the protagonists in every single book is a paladin. Moving to the right, we have Hidden Gem, a book with under 1,000 ratings on Goodreads, and I love that it's a bit more strict, saying new releases and arcs do not count, and if you want the hard mode option, it needs to be published more than 5 years ago. And I have a book from my 2024 purchased list, so it's a book I should have read in 2024, and I missed out on that. It's called The Last Human by Zach Jordan. This one does have less than 1,000 ratings on Goodreads, and I did some calculating, and it's just over 5 years old from publication date, because it was published in early 2020, and I was like, yes, perfect. I have an excuse to read this book that I should have read last year anyway. The next prompt might give some people trouble. It's a book published in the 80s, and if you want it to be for hard mode, then it also has to be by an author of color. Now, immediate choices could be Octavia Butler. She's a really good option, but for me, I decided to go with a translation by Haruki Murakami, Pinball 1973. This is the second book in the Rat series. Weirdly enough, I've read books 3 and 4. We're not going to talk about it, but I'm trying to go back and read books 1 and 2 that I didn't know existed, and I should have known existed. And so in a few months, in August, for Not Reading for Content, we're reading the first book, and I can't remember the name, Hear the Wind Sing. And I could have counted that, but the translation was published in the 1980s, but technically the original publication in Japan was 1979, and I just didn't feel right about it. And so the second book is actually published in Japan, 1980, and then 5 years later was finally published in English for the first time. And so I figured, hey, in August, I'm going to read Hear the Wind Sing, and then I can eventually move on to Pinball 1973. I really wanted to finish this series in a very quasi way anyway this year. Next to that one is High Fashion. Read a book where clothing or fashion or fiber arts are important to the plot. And then we also have hard mode, being the main character makes clothes and fibers. And you know what? I'm just gonna follow the example provided by Our Fantasy, which is A Mask of Mirrors by M.A. Carrick. I double checked with a friend who read the series, loved it. She's actually gonna be doing a reread video where she dives really deeply into the analysis of this book. It's Danny Dabbles, if you didn't already know. And so I double checked with her saying, hey, does this count for hard mode? She confirmed it, and so there we go. Down with the system. This one, it gave me so much trouble because I kept thinking, well, what is a system? What do we mean by this? Because obviously we typically think of a government system, and that is not counting for hard mode. So it says, read a book in which a main plot revolves around disrupting a system, not a governmental system. I put maybe 4 or 5 different books in there and then didn't feel right about it and just kept moving it around because, you know, I like to put more work for myself apparently. And the title I decided to settle on is one that I really do want to read soon. We Lived on the Horizon by Erica Swyler. This is a new publication as well. It just came out in 2025. I have the book. 1 second. I actually have it right here. I didn't have to go anywhere. So here is the book in the flesh, an engrossing new novel about a bioprosthetic surgeon and her personal AI as they are drawn into a revolution. To my understanding, she is a very intelligent, older person in this community, and she knows that her time is up. So what she ends up doing is transferring, copy and pasting her brain, all of her knowledge, all of her expertise into the brain, the mind, the tech of a robot, and that robot's name is Nyx. I love a robot character. I really, really do, and I'm really excited about this one. What makes it perfect for this hard mode prompt, in my opinion, is that there's a bit of a class system where really we're discussing generational wealth, but generational wealth through time, through life credits, and the more credits your family line has, the longer you get to live or extend your life. And so there's supposedly a disruption in that, and that leads to a revolution. I actually have no idea if I made any coherent sense about that one, but I promise I'm 99% sure this is going to fit for that prompt. Moving down to the second row, we have impossible places. This also did my head in. Read a book set in a location that would break a physicist. And then there is the hard mode, of course, that says at least 50% of the book takes place within that impossible place. And I also was throwing in different titles. I thought about Infinity Gate for a second because I do want to read that in the next month. But what I decided to choose is the 22 Murders of Madison May by Max Barry. This has been on my list to read for quite some time, for a couple years, possibly since it was actually published. And what happens is our main character discovers that a man has murdered Madison May, this really well-known actress, and then she ends up unintentionally following him into a different reality, a different dimension, where all of the people are the same, but maybe they're having different experiences. And this one, Madison May isn't famous, and yet the man also takes the time to murder her, and she keeps following him into various different realms, and every single time his one goal is to murder Madison May. And so our protagonist is trying to figure out what's going on, how to stop this quasi serial killer. It seems really fascinating, and I feel like it would break the mind of a physicist because we're discussing like multiple dimensions of reality, I hope. Next, we have a book in parts. Read a book that is separated into large sections within the main text. And for hard mode, it has to be at least 4 sections or more. For this one, I am choosing Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. I should be reading this book. A lot of people have recommended it to me. It's described as kind of sci-fi fantasy mixed together. A necromancer is the main character. And I really want to join the bandwagon. And I can confirm there are at least 4 acts, so this one counts for hard mode, and I just needed the excuse to finally read this because I also purchased this in 2025, and so for that goal for the year, I absolutely have to read it. Gods and Pantheons. Read a book featuring divine beings, and for the hard mode, there are multiple pantheons involved. Now, this one, I am taking a bit of a risk. I'm reading Holy Terrors by Margaret Owen. This is the 3rd and final book in the Little Thieves trilogy following Vanya Schmidt. I love this series so much, and I know in past books, they've discussed the idea that there are multiple pantheons, and depending on where you are in the world, certain stories affect the low gods that are, moving about them. So I'm wondering if in this final book that will take ever more precedence, and if we will see the changing of the story if Vanya ends up going about the empire into different areas. So we'll see. If not, I may have to choose a different book, and if I do, please leave any type of recommendations in the comments because that one was kind of tough for me. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited for this next one. Last in a series. Read the final entry in a series, and that series has to be 4 or more books long to get the hard mode. And I also had the hardest time with this one because if you know me, I'm not someone who really reads series or keeps up with them very well. I've gotten better with every passing year, but I couldn't think of any series that I was even in the middle of that had 4 or more books, because I just don't tend to read that. And so I decided to rely on manga. And so I'm going to be reading the 5th and final installment in A Cat from Our World and the Forgotten Witch, a cat manga. Are we surprised? And what's really important about this, to be a bit fair as well, I've only read volumes 1 and 2, so I'd have to read volumes 3, 4, and 5, kind of treat it like a bind up, and I think that's perfectly reasonable. And so I'm counting it for that prompt. I'm leaving the final square on the second row empty because it says it's a book club or read-along book for our fantasy, and if you want to accomplish hard mode, you have to read and participate in an R fantasy book club or read-along during the bingo year, and I don't understand what Reddit is. I don't know how to navigate it. I don't know if there's a list for where all of the books are going to be for this coming year for them, or if they just kind of announce it as it happens. So I need to figure out how that works, and then I can maybe see if I can accomplish hard mode and join them in one of their read-alongs or buddy reads, because that sounds really fun to me. Also, if you have any tips and tricks, and if you know for a fact that R Fantasy has already decided their book club reads for the year, maybe let me know where I can find it, because I was like, I feel like I'm trying to read a foreign language when I'm on Reddit and I don't really know what I'm doing. On to row number 3. And for the first prompt, we have parent protagonist. Another one that actually was so hard for me. It says, read a book where a main character has a child to care for. The child does not have to be biologically related to the character. Can I speak? And then we have the child is also a major character in the story for hard mode. And I didn't know. I honestly was like, this is going to be impossible for me to find a book that I already am interested in reading. But then I remembered Faithbreaker by Hannah Kaner is just coming out now. It was published on the 1st of April. It's the 3rd and final installment in the Fallen Gods trilogy. The first one was Godkiller, second was Sunbringer. You probably know about it. And this one does feature a really fascinating dynamic between an older character who does become a parent figure, a guardian for our younger character, Anara, where I would argue that this should count, even though they're not biologically related. So you can kindly fight me in the comments, but I think it should count. Epistolary, oh my gosh, another one that it's really hard for you to fully know if that's going to be the case unless someone has told you about this book and recommends it to you because of the way that it's stylistically written. It says the book must prominently feature any of the following: diary or journal entries, letters, messages, newspaper clippings, transcripts, and for hard mode, the book is told entirely in epistolary format. For this one, I kind of lucked out because a lot of people in their reviews on Goodreads were very forthcoming about how this book was written, and it kind of makes sense. I had a backup just in case. Basically, the reason why it's a backup and not the main book is because I already have another book by this author on my bingo board, and I didn't really know if I wanted to double dip with the same author, especially what if I don't like the book. Looking at the rules, it doesn't matter anyway, because it says that you may not repeat an author on the card unless they are part of the short story square. So this backup is non-existent at this point, so never mind, doesn't really matter. Anyways, this is again all in my head, but the book I went with is The Strange Case of Jane O by Karen Thompson Walker. I actually have The Dreamers by this author on my backlist TBR that I just haven't picked up, but if I really like this one, then hopefully that will motivate me to read that other backlist title. For this one, I'm told that it's from 2 different perspectives. We have the transcripts or notes from the psychiatrist, and then the woman main character, his patient, we have her letters to her son. So that's really interesting and potentially means that it could maybe count for parent protagonist, but I don't know how much the caretaker role or those types of like scenes will happen in this book, but it definitely counts for epistolary and for hard mode. The central square for this bingo board is published in 2025, a book published for the first time in 2025, no reprints, no new editions, meaning that Sword Heart wouldn't count. That first book I mentioned for the uppermost left-hand square, that one wouldn't count because it's actually an older publication. It's just getting a new release in 2025. So just for that type of comparison, if you weren't sure what that could mean. For hard mode, it also needs to be a debut novel, so the author's first novel. And I am putting on Luminous by Sylvia Park. I am so excited for this book. It seems really fascinating. I am obsessed with the cover, and I currently have the ebook from the library, so I probably should be reading it soon. And then I'm honestly, a lot of these titles that I'm interested in are ones I plan on reading in the next couple months. So, I mean, if I'm actually doing what I hope to do, this won't be as hard of a challenge as I'm feeling it would be as my first year ever doing this. But anyways, Luminous looks great. I'm really excited to be supporting a debut author. I didn't even know that she was a debut author until I did more research on the title. I just assumed that she was a seasoned author, so excited about this one, very much so. Author of color, read a book written by a person of color. For hard mode, it has to be a horror novel. For some people who aren't horror readers, I feel like that is kind of a struggle, and I would probably recommend maybe do like a genre blend, so like horror sci-fi, horror fantasy, maybe lean into middle grade horror. That could be something where you can find some really good options that are a bit more atmospheric, if anything else. For me, I ended up choosing But Not Too Bold by Ache Pueo. I don't know who this author is. This might be a debut. I don't think it is though, now that I think about it, but I am obsessed with the cover. I'm pretty sure it's a novella, and it kind of gives me Eat the Rich vibes. So, I mean, I'm here for it. Let's do it. And the final square on that third row is small press or self-published, which is pretty self-explanatory. The only caveat given is that it definitely can't be one of the big 5 publishing houses, or it can't be a book that was once self-published and now you're reading it after the fact that it has been picked up by another big publisher, because we are seeing that quite a bit, and we've seen that for quite some time. Again, I'm kind of over explaining things, but the hard mode is the book has under 100 ratings on Goodreads, or it's written by a marginalized author, and I've decided to choose the latter option for that hard mode. I really appreciate that they gave 2 options for it. The book I'm reading is Blood on Her Tongue by Johanna Van Veen. I have an arc for it, and I'm definitely not going to read it before it comes out because I'm horrible about that. Uh-oh, friends. Turns out I am wrong. Can you believe it? So Blood on Her Tongue comes out of Poison Pen Press, which is owned by Source Books, which is owned by Penguin Random House. So this doesn't fit for the prompt. That's okay. I can always read this book some other time or for a different challenge. For this square, though, in order to keep hard mode, I will be reading A Lonely Broadcast by Kel Byron. This fits for both prompts, and I'm really excited. It's spooky, and it's been compared to Welcome to Night Vale, a book that I also really enjoy, so it's perfect. Dropping down and to the left, we have Biopunk. Read a book that focuses on biotechnology and or its consequences. For hard mode, there is no electricity-based technology. When I saw this prompt and realized what book I could read, I shouted, huzzah! I was so excited. So the book I'm reading for this one is A Drop of Corruption by Robert Jackson Bennett. Obviously, if you haven't started this series, you could start with The Tainted Cup. That also counts. The reason why it works for biotech and for hard mode is that we are living in a community where they still use horses and drawn wagons, and they use, gas lamps and everything else in between. But the biotech comes from how they repurpose and utilize the blood and flesh of leviathans that are swimming just on the other side of the seawalls and threatening to destroy civilization. It is a great time. Elves and or dwarves. This one was my second hardest prompt to accomplish. I really didn't know what I was doing, and it definitely speaks to the fact that I am newish to fantasy reads. In the last couple of years, I've definitely got more into them, but I felt far more comfortable with the sci-fi prompts or the prompts that lent themselves to horror, and it spoke volumes because I was like, what books have elves or dwarves in them, let alone for hard mode making them the main character? So I did some digging and I ended up leaning on another manga series. This one is a doozy. Like, the title is a mile long. What is it? I can't even see it. Enough with this slow life. I was reincarnated as a high elf and now I'm bored. Like I said, that's a mouthful. And what I would probably do, similar to A Cat from Our World and The Forgotten Witch, I'm realizing there's a pattern in the manga that I'm reading, or at least that I'm picking up. I am going to read a bind up. So I'll read the first 3 volumes just to make it kind of equate the idea of reading a novella, for instance. LGBTQIA protagonist. Read a book where a main character is under the LGBTQIA plus umbrella. For hard mode, that character is marginalized on at least one additional access, such as being a person of color, disabled, a member of an ethnic, religious, cultural minority in the story, etc. And so for this one, I went with The Jimbot of Shantaport by Samit Basu. This is another one I own. One second. I swear, I always am trying to give editing Leandra more trouble and more tasks to complete. I don't understand it. But the reason why this one should count is because I'm told it has a great, huge cast of very casually queer characters. One of the main characters, I believe, is agender, and then another character is on the queer spectrum in some shape or form. And I also believe it should count for hard mode because our main character, Lena, she is a daughter of a failed revolutionary and has no desire to escape Shantaport. She loves her city and would do anything to save her people, but they are still under colonist rule, and because there are colonizers involved, I think it should count for the hard mode. Next, we have 5 sci-fi or fantasy short stories. In order to accomplish hard mode, you have to read an entire anthology or collection. And so the one I've put here is Out There, Into the Queer New Yonder. It's a YA science fiction dystopian anthology, and it's edited by Sandra Mitchell. I know for a fact that the library where I work has this on our shelves, and I've been meaning to check it out for so long that I'm like, perfect, our fantasy is looking out for me. And so I will be reading this entire collection, and I'm sure I'm just gonna have the best time because I really do love these YA collections. I hope that we see more of them being published, especially those that are supporting and encouraging queer stories. Stranger in a Strange Land. Read a book that deals with being a foreigner in a new culture, and for hard mode, the main character is an immigrant or refugee. I feel that this book should count, but I would understand if people want to argue that it doesn't. We will see what you think. So for me, I'm counting Blood Over Brighthaven by Emma Wong. I've started this book, and that's why I feel confident that there is a main character who is a refugee. We have Siona, she's our main character, and she works at this institute as a high mage, but her assistant is a refugee in essence. This assistant is a main character in my opinion. He's crucial to the story, and in fact, the novel opens with the first chapter in his perspective as he and his people are fleeing for safety to the Empire where the main story actually takes place. And he's also very heavily discriminated against by others because of where he comes from, and he's simply trying to survive and make ends meet. So I think this book should definitely count for the hard mode prompt. We only have 5 more squares, so let's get through this. Recycle a bingo square. Use a square from a previous year, 2015 to 2024, and there is the issue that some of the older bingos don't have hard mode. I ended up just going to 2024 because I'm like, all of this is new to me, doesn't really matter. And the prompt I ended up choosing was criminals. Read a book in which the main character is a criminal, and then we have hard mode, which features a heist, and I was like, the third and final book in the sci-fi romance heist trilogy, which is Last Chance to Save the World by Beth Revis. These novellas have been so fun so far, and I'm actually sad to see the conclusion come, but I'm also really looking forward to it. And I can't remember what the series is called. I think it is Chaotic Orbits. The first book is called Full Speed to a Crash Landing. The entire series would count for this specific prompt from 2024. So if you wanted to use it for Recycle a Bingo Square, you definitely can. And like I said, it totally counts for hard mode. And the reason I say that is because Ada, the main character, is 100% a professional con artist, tech guru, and she causes a lot of trouble for those with very deep pockets. Cozy, sci-fi, or fantasy. Cozy is up to your preferences for what you find comforting, but the genre typically features relatable characters, low stakes, minimal conflict, and a happy ending. For hard mode, it's an author that is new to you. And I had the perfect book, and I'm so excited to read this. It's called The Last Gifts of the Universe by Riley August. Danny Dabbles, I talked about her earlier in this video, she loved this book when she was reading it for Get a Clue, the readathon that we were hosting in February, created by Rainy Blue Reads, and I have been dying to read this. I actually saw this on Hoopla maybe last year, added it to my want to read list on that platform, and then I just kind of forgot about it. So when she brought it up, I was like, I know exactly what title you're talking about. It has a space cat on the cover. Of course I know what this book is. And now for the hardest prompt of them all. At least it was very hard for me. Generic title. Read a book that has one or more of the following words in the title: blood, bone, broken court, dark shadow, song, sword, or throne. And then for the hard mode, you can either put 2 of those words in the title, or you include like a color, number, or animal. And I swear that's generic for fantasy readers, or specifically like romantasy readers in my opinion. It is not normal for me, though none of those terms really are generic. And so I was like, this is already hard mode. And so what I ended up going for is one that was recommended on the Our Fantasy recommendations list. So thank you to, those anonymous people who do that. We have Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi. I know that this is YA, and it's actually very, very popular. I think it has over 200,000 ratings on Goodreads. And so I think it's going to be a really great read. So many people I know have loved it in the past, so I don't really know why I've waited so long to try it. The 24th prompt is just a really fun, kind of casual, cozy one. Not a book. Do something new besides reading a book. And they do emphasize new. So it has to be a new TV show, a new game. You can't be continuing anything that you've already loved. And so for this one, again, perfect timing with this bingo board, because I was telling my Manor guests on my Patreon that a cozy game that I've been meaning to try, that I keep putting off, is The Last Campfire. I just love the artwork. I love the idea of the storytelling in it, and I think it's just going to be a really fun time. And so that's what I'm going to be playing for that. And for hard mode, you simply have to write and post a review on Our Fantasy. That's something I'm going to have to figure out, but it'll be fine. I'll do it eventually. We have finally reached the last square on this bingo board, and it is pirates. Read a book where characters engage in piracy. For hard mode, they aren't seafaring pirates. I was really trying to find a title for this too. I just kept really kind of struggling with what titles I could find. I kept searching for space pirates, and because of that search, I did discover Polaris Rising by Jessie Mihalik. This is the same author as the Starlight Shadow series, one that I love to death. Specifically, the first book is my favorite, and I have reread it this year already, so you know that I'm a big fan of this author. I keep meaning to go to her backlist and read more by her. This is a sci-fi romance, and one of the main characters is described as a space pirate princess. That's it. She's a space pirate princess. Not sure what is going on there. Maybe she's a princess turned pirate, but I'm here for it. I think it's going to be a really fun palate cleanser read. So yeah, that is my current TBR for the Our Fantasy bingo board this year, and I am looking forward to every single title. Quite a few of them were already on my TBR list, honestly. They were anticipated releases or continuations of series that I already want to read. There were some that I had to scrounge for, and who knows, they might end up being new found favorites, hidden gems, and I'm really looking forward to discovering that as well. Let me know in the comments if you're participating in Our Fantasy, what prompt you're most excited for, what books I should maybe start with, and also kindly let me know if I did end up doing a prompt wrong, because I want to be fair, because this is my first year, and you know what, mistakes happen. So please let me know very kindly if you think a book actually isn't going to count for the prompt I'm putting it for, because in the long run that helps me not waste my time. I will probably still read the book, but I won't read it for said bingo board, if that makes sense. Thank you so much for getting to the end. Thank you to my Manor guests. I really do appreciate all of your support. And for those of you who got to the end but don't really feel chatty and you still want to prove to me that you have reached the end and you are, you know, one of the real ones, maybe in honor of The Last Campfire, because that's a video game I really do want to play in 2025, do a campfire emoji, fire emoji, or just something very woodsy, as if, you know, we're out in the natural habitat that is the wilderness. Thanks everybody, and I really do hope to see everyone in the next one. If you're looking for more book recommendations, a video will be right here, and I'll see you guys later. Bye!